Oh, yes, there we go. Thank you. I'll let him bring that forward. Okay, so we haven't got any apologies. I understand Peter Fairley-Jones is on his way and should hopefully be here by 6:30. So we'll record him when he arrives. We've got no motions to grant leave of absence and no leave of absence. Declarations of interest from the committee members. Anything in relation to the papers that we have before us? No? Okay, thank you. Confirmation of the minutes of our previous meeting, 10th of February, already circulated. Okay, thanks, David. Seconded, Karen. All in favour? Okay, thank you. And business arising from those minutes, Paul, captured within the agenda? Okay. So we can go straight into our Officer Report 6.1, the 2021 Long-Term Financial Plan Update.
I can give a brief overview.
Thanks.
Chair, through you. Yes, the primary purpose of the meeting tonight was really relative to the budget and long-term financial plan for the committee to have their first formal look at those draft reports. As we've populated in the reports, Chair, we've had 4 workshops with elected members starting in late January, and this is really, as I see, the first formal consideration of the budget. So as an administration, we're certainly keen to get the feedback from the committee relative to the reports presented. In relation to the long-term financial plan, members, hopefully I've provided fairly self-explanatory commentary in the report, but I just wanted to, I guess, emphasise a couple of points, Chair, that one, before I start, one was just in relation to a correction in the text, not in the dollars or any of the modelling, but if I refer you to page 7 of 39 of the agenda, under item 4.4, grants, subsidies and contributions. In previous iterations of the plan relative to roads to recovery, grant funding, the second dot point, I was previously of the understanding, Chair, that funding was ceasing in 2023-24. However, sorry, ma'am. Yes, yeah, the Roads to Recovery Office based out of Canberra has confirmed that yes, there will be ongoing supplementary funding to that, which we've modelled in the numbers over the 10 years. It's just I only noticed when I was reading it today that I hadn't updated that comment accordingly. So I just wish to bring that to your attention. Relative to the, I guess the key part of the long-term financial plan is relative, as I say, relative to the 10-year modelling that we do. So what we've done, similar to previous years, members, is we've particularly had a focus on the general rate sensitivity analysis. So in that regard, we had done modelling based on 1.5 to 2.5 and 3% increases in general rate revenue from existing ratepayers, and essentially all else being equal, endeavoured to illustrate for members what the implications are on those modelling, and that's essentially encapsulated in the graphs and tables from page 11 of 39 through to page 14, and we've sort of endeavoured to provide commentary in that regard. I guess the key findings, as I see from that, is that based on the key assumptions that we've outlined in the document, in addition to making sure the replacement renewal for assets is consistent with the draft asset management plans. We're of the view that, as is disclosed in the graphs, a ongoing annual increase in general rates of 1.5 to 2% isn't sustainable and would have adverse impact on our ratios. And particularly, members, if I refer you to bottom page 11 of 39 of the agenda and page 12 relative to the operating ratio and the operating result, you'll see from there with those tables, particularly, and as we've indicated, the red shading means the indicative results would be outside the policy target and the green shading would be within. As you'd be aware, we're currently operating in a deficit environment, and Chair, certainly the feedback from the committee has been to get back to an operating surplus as quickly as practically as we can. And in that context, what I've noted is that with a 2.5 and 3% increase, there's the capacity, potential capacity to get back to a surplus by 24-25 financial year, whereas with a 2% increase, that would then be pushed out a further 2 years, and with a 1.5% increase, the numbers suggest for that full 10 years, we wouldn't be getting back to a surplus position. Similarly, with the other key ratio being the net financial liabilities ratio on the bottom of page 13 of 39, you'll see from there that, again, with the different rating sensitivity applied, it clearly shows that with a 2.5 and 3% increase, there's the potential capacity to get that ratio result down more quickly as compared to a 1.5 and 2% increase. Because I think it's safe to say, Chair, there is certainly an appetite in the chamber to get debt down, and the administration has continually been of the view, and I think Councillor Koshy mentioned it at one workshop, with the liabilities ratio where we essentially, it peaked about 86% in about 2011, I think, Chair, and then well, you would recall from your time, there was the instruction from the committee to get back to surplus, get the debt down, which we did, and that provided importantly provided the borrowing capacity to refurbish this building, and without which we wouldn't have been able to do. So the administration's essentially proposing that we sort of continue that trend such that now we've got this beautiful building refurbished. We want to be able to the council to be in a position over the next 4 to 5 years to get that debt down, which will then importantly build borrowing capacity for our next sort of iconic project. So taking into consideration the operating ratios and the net financial liabilities ratio, and as we have indicated in the report, I don't believe any of the ratios should be looked at in isolation. They've all got to be considered collectively. And when doing so, you were of the view that and the recommendation put to the committee tonight is based on a 2.5 to 3% increase in general rate revenue from existing ratepayers. So, Chair, I've endeavoured to, in the report, to sort of outline at the start of the report the key assumptions from an operating perspective. Happy to welcome feedback from the members in relation to that. We've then outlined the capital expenditure, capital revenue modelling that we've based on, referencing the debt with the table on page 10, with outlining what our current debt is, and then we've undertaken that sensitivity analysis of those 4 different rating modelling. So, Mayor, that's really all I wanted to touch on at this stage, because we certainly welcome getting feedback from the committee.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, so, David?
Thanks, Chair. Just a question on the CPI at the moment. I believe it's sitting on about 1% and it's sort of forecast to stay in that 1%. There's also the council CPI rate. Is there any idea roughly what that's sitting at for council's goods and services through the Chair?
Yes, through the Chair. I think whether it's in this report or it might be in the draft budget report, the Adelaide CPI is at 1%, but I think from memory reading today, Chair, the local government price index at the moment is actually at 0% to end of December. However, the body that collates that and calculates that ratio, I'm just trying to find the page, had a qualifying comment saying that was subject to change further to additional analysis that they were hoping to complete by end of March. I looked again today, Chair, and that 0% hadn't changed. So that's where those ratios currently sit, but I'd suggest my understanding, I guess no one can accurately, definitively determine what the rates will be, but the information I've been provided with is that CPI will generally stay relatively consistent for the next couple of years, but then the Reserve Bank is suggesting it would be increasing back to their target rate of between 2 to 3%.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, just on that, I know through state government that the budgets that we're looking at are the most 1% that's all we're going to get. So I do think the 2.53% in this climate is sort of a bit of an ask, and I'd be looking at savings to keep our ratios where we want them to be rather than rates. There's things like we're spending $2 million on beautification over 2 years and things like that. In the past, this panel has actually been really good at finding the low-hanging fruit and actually helping us get those savings. Yeah, this climate, I think last year with the COVID raft, I think that worked really well, and that's in the report here, and I think that's quite really well explained, and I think it's the community actually really appreciated that from the feedback I've had. But I do think, anything especially over 2%, this is going to be difficult. So I do think we do need to work on these ratios and as a committee look at ways of savings or doing things differently until things do come back to that 2.5% CPI and work within those budgets of 1% CPI, which is quite incredible really. But yeah, I think it is probably part of our role on this committee.
Yep, sure. Thanks, David. David, Paul?
Yeah, look, I suppose I'm of the same view. I'm concerned about the rate increase. I'd just like to ask about workforce efficiency gains, how the council's going about that, because because in here, in the attachments we're looking at, is it 6 new staff? Is it 6 new staff or 4 new staff? Whereas normally we have 2, incrementally have 2, another 2. I'm just wondering whether we can find some efficiencies where we don't necessarily need those extra 2 to keep the budget in check a bit.
Karen?
Thank you. Thanks for the report, Paul. Yeah, I'm also looking at new rate revenue from growth, and in a separate report talks about 0.5 to 3.3% over the life of the long-term financial plan, and we have sat on 2% fairly consistently. I think last year we went up. I think we were 2.3, which is probably part of the COVID bubble for new homes as a result of the subsidy. So you've got to add that in to your 2.5 to 3% rate increase in rate revenue. So it is about efficiencies, and I do agree that, you know, projects like 2.1 million for Lindott Road is certainly, you know, is can we afford something like that over 2 years? I'd feel a bit uncomfortable with 3%. I'd be happy with 2 to 2.5, and remove the 3%. You've predicated the draft budget on 2.5, so I'd be more inclined to have 2 to 2.5. And I completely hear what the other elected members are saying. You know, we've got a 0% local government index, CPI. CPI is not relevant, but it is relevant politically, unfortunately. It's just, we need to have enough revenue to manage our sustainability. We've got our asset management plans that are saying that they're understated, or our assets are understated. So what impact will that have on our long-term financial plan? I know we'll get that in a future meeting. So I think there's going to be some pressures on the long-term financial plan over time. I think we've improved our performance quite significantly since 2010, Peter. I think you'd agree with that, particularly around our indicators. Our asset sustainability ratio was poor, something like 28%. And of course, our financial liabilities index is high, but I think with our improved asset sustainability, I think it's acceptable for a growth council. However, it doesn't give us a lot of room to move. We've increased our loan borrowings for this next budget by 1.3 million, I believe. No, it's not going down, it's going up. So that concerns me. I know that's part of our long-term financial plan. That's been included. I keep bringing that up. So I'd like to see some innovative strategies around saving that 0.5%, which is 100,000, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So all we need to do is save 100,000, we get it to 2%. Yeah. So I'd prefer to see 2 to 2.5 there. I think that might address, but I'm not sure if that addresses Councillor Hughes and Councillor Koch's concerns. That's my comments.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, look, I'm noticing around for the other committees, they're going on that 2 to 2.5, not any further. And you're right, they are looking at other ways of, you know, so that's the income, but they're looking at it also from the expenditure side where they can, you know, make, you know, savings, whether it's through efficiencies. And look, the other key part is also, I think, what they're finding now is the other big expenditure that's going to happen is all your materials. I mean, that's nobody knows what's happening because there's such everyone is trying to get to it, and they're saying that could see some price gouging happening, and you know, so it could be even greater. So you've got to be very careful of managing that. Again, things like enterprise bargaining, you know, it's been kept at that level. I know a lot of people are saying, well, we can't have that 2%. It's from what we've been through, it's all got to get down to 1% now. You know, that's, you know, and it's happening. I mean, the private sector have accepted that. Some of the, you know, Commonwealth government have done that at 1%. So, you know, these are the areas, again, I'll leave it to management to make that call, but they've got to find the areas where we can get that, striking that balance of that 2 to 2.5, the rate increase, and then you've got to manage the bottom line. Now, Paul, can I just ask, the other one is actually asset sales. I know on the cash flow that over the 10 years, you're looking at about $1 million. I mean, are there no other assets that the council doesn't have that are surplus to its needs? I mean, look, the reason I say that is that, you know, and again, not saying it's the same type of council, but Adelaide City Council all of a sudden found 30 million. They found 30 million just in the space of because they were in such trouble. So my question being is there been enough look at what do we actually have? Are these assets really required for us to run this council and for the community? Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting that we've had some success. I think the CEO would agree with one particular parcel of land over in Evanston Gardens. I think that was a great outcome. But it is my observations, rightly or wrongly, as we look through asset sales, is often we don't get the money we're hoping to get. With exception of that particular parcel of land, I think we did well. But we make predictions on parcels of land that we put up. It becomes quite political. We end up withdrawing, which is one particular parcel of land, and it ends up costing us money. So I've had my fingers burnt as an elected member looking at that. As I said, there was a particularly successful parcel of land, and I think we should take that and celebrate that. I think that was a great outcome. And I think it was contaminated land as well. So I think we did very well. I beg your pardon? The Jack Cooper Drive land is the one I'm talking about. No. The one that we had to stop the process. But there isn't a lot from my recollection, but I won't go into because that's a confidential conversation that we need to have. But there wasn't a lot, Peter, on the books of council that is suitable to be sold. But that was just my recollection. I mean, like you said, fresh eyes can make a difference.
But is it only land though? Are there buildings, other assets? I mean, you look at your asset register, all I'm saying is there's someone going through that and saying, what is it that we really need? Is this still relevant for us for our business operations? Yeah. Yep.
Just on that, a couple of years ago, I'm sure we have actually, didn't we appoint an officer to look at the assets? And they were working through all the assets and that was their job. I thought, so what's happening there? Is that just falling in? Is that stopped, has it? Yeah, I know, but I mean, there's...
So no, we had an external consultant come in to undertake a land asset review, and that was the basis of the properties that were identified that we have sold, but properties that we tried to sell and we didn't sell, and then that resulted in it costing us money. You know, we had a property that had a building on it that was returning commercial rental, and it was decided, well, let's not sell it, let's take the advantage of the commercial rentals. And we've got the Creek Road, which has been a recent sale. So I think what we're actually providing for in the purposes of the long-term financial plan, i.e. $1 million, is a reflection of the fact that we've squeezed as much blood out of that stone as we can. Where opportunities present, we'll pursue, but there's no golden egg there in terms of land sales. I think that golden egg has hatched, and that's the Jack Cooper, which is a parcel of land that we rezoned, contaminated, and I think, as Mayor said, it was a positive outcome. So I don't think there's much in that space, but where opportunities present, we'll obviously pursue. But we didn't want that to be a key element of our long-term financial planning.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Paul?
Thank you. Through the chair, just to clarify, the asset sales, Chair, that are reflected in the long-term plan, that just relates to sale of equipment, vehicles that are replaced. So I think I'd referenced in the report, relative to there's no dollars provided in the long-term plan for sale of surplus assets. However, we have put in the commentary, I would always advocate continually pursuing that. However, I know in the previous local government life, Chair, the council had predicated, for example, in one year's budget, 800,000 from a cash perspective with sale of surplus assets. That didn't eventuate. Then suddenly come third quarter budget review, you're suddenly deciding, well, heck, how are we going to claw back that 800,000? So I would always continue to advocate, yes, where appropriate, continue to pursue sale of surplus property, but I would advocate it's a bit of a risky exercise relying your long-term financial plan on that happening. And that if it does, I'd prefer to look at it. If it does happen, it's a bonus, and those funds can be used to preferably reduce debt straight away, or alternatively a combination of debt reduction and allocation into different services. And if I can just respond to Mayor, one of your comments about the debt, yes, going up for 21-22, you certainly acknowledge that. But part of that is being driven by the fact that we've had a recent commitment, Chair, to invest in the conversion of street lights to LED. And I think around the table, it's safe to say that was a bit of a no-brainer, because for a potential net investment of about 800,000, if we're successful with a grant, we'll get $200,000 recurrent savings. But nonetheless, there's that initial upfront cost. And as we've indicated in the reports, whether it's this one or the draft 21-22 budget report, we have noted the fact that the increase in loans is really directly attributable to the key projects that we're seeking grant funding for. So as the Mayor and Councillor Hughes has referenced, the Lindop beautification project, and we've indicated in the report, I'd certainly be of the view that if we're not successful with getting that grant funding, then basically that net cost in the budget can be returned as a saving to reduce debt.
Thanks, Karen.
So I'm happy to move, but change point 2 to 2.0 to 2.5 and get rid of the 3%.
Yep.
And test the waters, see whether that gets up. So thank you, Kate. Yeah, I'm happy to speak to it briefly, but I've already spoken. I guess I'll. I think it's really good for the Audit Committee to provide advice to council. As a council member, I find it really, really useful. I think it helps council in their deliberations. I think it's really important that we continue this process. I acknowledge and thank staff for the high quality of reports that come through. It never ceases to amaze me just how much information is so well presented across a number of reports, but it really gives you a holistic picture of our financial position, our sustainability, and some of the challenges going forward. And I mentioned asset management plans and what that might do. And, you know, the long-term financial plan is a guide and it's not set in stone. It is good, as I said, to provide council with some thinking around general rate rises, what they might look like, etc. So I'll leave it at that and have a listen to other people's comments.
Thanks. Natalie, anything?
My comment, I agree with everything that's been said. You step back, because you know, can see the numbers supporting the 2.5 to 3. However, if you step back and you think from a reputational risk perspective, and whether you can go that high, my gut says around 2% seems right, and it's whether the savings can be found elsewhere. I don't think in the current environment that you can go 3%. It worked financially. That's how you get the numbers to work. I get that, but you just can't do it.
Thanks.
And as you said, Peter, like Adelaide City Council, it's just trying to find those other savings. They're there. And a lot of like state government agencies and that, they're going really lean now, and there's no surplus staff. They've all gone lean in order to save.
Thanks.
Yeah, after reading it, I mean, mine was 2.5. That was my upper. So that's what I'd sort of, you know, after reading everything. And I do think that if we can find efficiencies, I think we can find the gains there. I'm very concerned about putting stress on ratepayers at this moment. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so Karen, you've moved with the change of rates. So someone has seconded that. Natalie, thank you. All in favour? Okay, carried. Okay, so 6.2 is the policy review, so the infrastructure funding policy. Okay. Any comments or discussion from that? I think it's pretty straightforward. thanks. Well done, Paul, on that. So someone to second that? Yep, Natalie, thank you. All in favour? Okay, carried. And the other policies, which is the risk management policy and the asset management policy, so we'll do them one at a time. So can I, what, look, I'd just like to discuss the risk one. Again, I've seen the update, but I think our discussion has been about incorporating something around risk appetite and risk tolerance, and that still hasn't happened and it hasn't included. Now, my understanding was that Nathan was going to go away and talk to other councils who've got it embedded in their policies. So I don't know why that hasn't brought back, again, so I mean, do we bring it back to the next meeting or? Yep.
Risk management out.
Through the chair, look, ultimately in the committee's hands, I just wish to point out that there is a workshop scheduled for the 4th of May,
I think so, yes.
To have that workshop with elected members on a whole host of matters risk related. So look, it may suggest through the chair may be prudent that if the committee wishes to reconsider the risk management policy after that workshop discussion.
I think it will, because I mean, by us approving, then it's going to come back within a meeting's time.
Yep, happy with that.
So if we can just hold that one off.
Yep. So I'm happy to move just that point 1.
Okay. So just the asset management, any significant things? Paul, I don't think there's been that much of a change to that one, is it, the asset management? I think you've just incorporated all the policy.
One of them, there was definitions.
Yeah, they're up the front of the scoping, yep. I think you just updated with some numbers as well. Yeah, the definitions have gone in from the policy, so.
Yeah,
okay. So we're happy for that to go up to council? Yep, sorry. You want to use?
4.5.1, it says determining a defined level of service and measuring performance against that level. How's that actually done? How do we actually audit that? Because that's an on-ground, that's a, how do we audit that to make sure that that's happening?
Which one's that, 4.5?
Yeah. That was the only one all the other ones I've ticked, that's the only one I've got a question about. How's it actually done?
Through the chair, look, I would realistically see that as being obviously ultimately determining each year's performance in terms of asset management, particularly like replacement renewal perspective against defined levels of service, but there's also the maintenance consequences as well in terms of what are those service levels applying to those various asset management categories. So I would see that as what 4.5.1 is alluding to.
I've got a little bit to do. I have a little bit to do with auditing service levels, and for example, you might look at industry standards, Australian standards, legislation, etc., etc. I'm just wondering whether that's actually what we should be doing in that space. For example, you can have work practices that don't necessarily align with industry standards or Australian standards. So I'm just wondering whether that fits in there.
Through the chair, I think ultimately it's a case of determining what those levels of service are. You've got to have them defined before you can measure against them. So whether they're defined by industry standards or council's own consideration or a combination of both, but you'd need to have those service levels articulated and defined to measure against them.
So, but wouldn't they be within the individual asset management plans though, if that's what we're
Yes.
So that's where you would,
For example, we recently had an audit of our tree services, and we found that some of the service level was too high, and some of the actual work that was done wasn't within industry standards.
Yep.
So that was an external auditor came in and did an audit and found that. So I'm just wondering whether we're going to do that with other areas as well. Because for me, that's what that means, is that they're audited against, the standards and industry standards, etc.
Henry?
Yeah, to be completely honest, I think this is an area that we haven't done well throughout the organisation in terms of service level reviews. And in terms of what you've just mentioned as an example is, it's very difficult. I would suggest that these service level reviews are done internally. There will be a certain category of activities that we can do internally, but if we had our staff doing a self-analysis of those practices, we wouldn't have had the same outcome that we had with an external sort of set of eyes. Now that costs money and that takes time, and I'm wanting to push the envelope on a whole raft of things in respect to service level reviews. And you might have picked up in the previous report that I'm putting the challenge within the administration in terms of service level reviews and testing whether we've got the right service delivery model relative to the depot operations, and also whether relative to our rec centre and swimming pool. And I want to set the foundation over the next 12 to 18 months to test whether or not, in terms of service level standards and cost of service and benchmarking, that whether we need to outsource, parts, whole parts or portions of those activities. And we just can't do that internally. And so that's going to cost money, and that'll take a little bit of time, but there too are the major examples of testing the current mindsets within the organisation that we need to set the foundations for the next 10 years. And we just can't do that internally because we won't get the sort of benchmark answers. So I think, again, the depot operations, particularly maintenance, because we're about to have an exponential increase in open space provision, and we need to set the foundation now over the next 12 to 18 months for what happens for the next decade. And what does that mean at an operational level? Well, that means that as internal staff move on and retire, and then we have internal recruitment, that's great. But then we have substantive positions that historically have been just filled with permanent staff. Now, I've actually drawn a line in the sand and said, I'm not filling those subsequent vacancies. We'll put contractors in because that gives us the flexibility. And when we do these reviews, we'll know whether or not the decision not to fill them as permanent positions was the correct decision, or whether we do fill them with permanent, or the alternative with contractors. So it's going to be a major piece of work, but I think it demonstrates that we're not accepting the status quo, but increasingly we need these areas to be tested externally to make sure that we get the right benchmarks.
Thanks, Henry. That's good to know. Welcome, Peter. Just very quickly, a quick rundown. So we've gone through the long-term financial plan. We changed the recommendation. It had 2.5% and 3% as the two. We've discussed it and brought that back to 2 and 2.5. We've said to Paul to change the recommendation that was passed. We've approved the Gawler East Development Funding Policy that's gone through with the changes, and we've withdrawn the risk management, given we've got an upcoming workshop. We want to incorporate the findings and the discussions from that and then bring that policy. And we're just talking about the asset management, of which the big discussion was around the service levels and what levels you need to set. And Henry's just indicated that he believes that more further service level reviews will really assist in that area. So thank you for that. So any other comments? So Karen, you're going to move that policy. Someone to second it. Thanks, Natalie. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you. So policy reviews, we've done those. 6.4 is the 21-22 draft budget. A number of attachments to it. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, so again, this is the committee's first chance to have a look at the draft budget being tabled, bearing in mind the proposed recommendations put to the committee were essentially consistent with the long-term financial plan in terms of the rate increase. So bearing in mind the decision the committee's just made, I'd suggest yes, there'll be a change there. But nonetheless, I just really wanted to quickly, I guess, go through what I see the high points in terms of we've endeavoured to, within the body of the agenda, just give a sort of overview of the budget on page 29 of 39, just for the as I guess a bit of an audit trail balance check, referencing the long-term financial plan projections, table 2 on page 29, just indicating their members the alignment between the draft budget and the long-term financial plan. And that's really just a check for me to determine, well, how sort of robust or reliable are the projections, key assumptions embedded into the long-term financial plan. We've then provided reference relative to the various budget bids and broken down to replacement renewal, Chair, which we've continually referenced as non-discretionary investment. Then the new and upgraded assets, which we've referenced as discretionary. As we've noted on page 31 of 39 within the agenda, the intent has been to limit the discretionary capital bids for new and upgraded assets to those 4 bullet points noted on that page, i.e. where there's a legal contractual obligation, in instances where we've already had confirmed external funding, and we recently, I think only last week, were advised of our success in relation to stage 1 of Carbeathan Reserve, which has been a good outcome. And then the other budget bids relate to the operating new initiatives, where we've provided, consistent with the previous year's index funding of 200,000, noting the bids that are currently above the line are oversubscribed, as we've noted in the report, by just over 17,000. We've then referenced the new staffing budget bids, noting that collectively there were bids for 7 FTE, and the discussion from the administration perspective has been to proposing a 4 FTE outside of the normal 2 that we've provided for. And more recently, Chair, we've had the most recent workshop, the 4th workshop, we started the conversation relative to elected member budget bids. The then outlined on page 33 of 39 under section 9, importantly referring to the financial indicators and the impact on the draft budget. So we've demonstrated there in table 5 the different outcomes on those indicators from a 2.5% to 3% increase. So if the committee was seeking to look at a 2 to 2.5%, then those numbers would be adjusted accordingly. And we've then provided a series of attachments to the report, which is effectively the attachments 1 and 2, demonstrating the statutory statements on that 2.5% to 3% increase, and then the whole series, suite of other attachments, whether it be a drill down, breakdown of the operating income and expenditure, then a further breakdown of the contracts, materials and other expenses, and then referencing all the budget bids. So that's, I just want to put that context, Chair, and happy to get comments from the floor.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, open it up to the committee. So Paul, can I just ask, so were you saying that these 4 positions are over and above the 2 that normally goes in? So it's not, we're not saying 6, we're saying 4. And of those 4, so I'm looking at the digital marketing and the internal audit and risk. I mean, could they be done through an outsourced arrangement? Does it need to be a full-time person sitting, again, I mean, I only say that, and again, and I'm happy for Natalie to speak because she's been on the other side. I mean, with the internal audit side of it, I mean, I've seen firms do it for maybe half that budget and actually do some very professional, focused internal audits based on your risk profile. So again, that's my question. It's you've got to ask from our earlier conversations if we can do something in this initial period. So you could do that, and then maybe someone within the council, you know, work with that audit firm or that professional firm, and then gain the skills, and then bring a full-time resource. So again, you know, there are options. And again, Natalie, would you maybe like?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think you can, because it's what Henry said before with the, you know, consultants, contractors, is that they have their own frameworks. You don't have, and they can, you know, leverage their team as well. So for that, for the internal auditor, you'd have for that salary a sort of a, you know, somewhat experienced person. But if you got a firm in, then you would have a leveraged team like a partner, a senior manager spending different time. And I think you get a better output for it. Also, if you bring them in front of the audit committee, you know, we've had experience dealing with, you know, accounting firms, so you can really push them to produce results. And I think for the as far as, you know, the amount you're paying, I think you get a better outcome.
So that's the approach that we've actually taken here, in that I think 6-9 months ago, we were talking about this area, and we were thinking the conventional local government model, well, let's get somebody and employ them, and that's going to be their job. And the feedback was, no, don't do that. What we need to do is have a model whereby we can go to market, get the best practice expertise who can do that strategic sort of internal control analysis, and then we have the benefit of that. And so that's what we've done relative to part of the solution. The other part of the solution is that Nathan Hall, who up until more recently has been focusing on work health safety, with his youth and enthusiasm and experience in work health safety, we've sought to build his capacity. And so now we've got a bit of a hybrid model where he's our internal resource, which we've had previously. We're changing the sort of the scope of his responsibilities in terms of the internal control functions, being informed by engaging external consultants to undertake the external the control reviews. And so, for example, we've done that relative to our asset management planning, which will have reports back through this committee. Now, that's demonstrated that we are getting best practice market analysis of our controls. We have that resource internally, but when expanding Nathan's role from work health safety to internal control, we just can't bulk that onto his workload that we had previously. So this function and what we're seeking to fund relative to the budget is a support role relative to that internal control function, which then adds to work health safety and internal control. So we're seeking actually the model that was discussed through this committee, which is very much informed by engaging external consultants. So Bentley's, I think that's correct, isn't it, Paul? Bentley's have been engaged. They're doing the first of the 3 internal control reviews over the coming 12-month period.
Okay.
So we just need that additional capacity to facilitate that work to be done internally in terms of the consequences, and then the changes and the monitoring and the reporting and so forth.
But if you continue to use, well, and again, I mean, see, now this was my call again, sorry, Ross, this is my call to Nathan as well, is I don't want Bentley's to be the one and only source of this expertise that's coming in to the organisation. So my question being is that if you, rather than allocating it to a position, you actually have an internal audit budget that you go to market depending on who's got the skill sets to actually come and do that internal audit. I mean, if it's a HR type audit, let's just say there's a risk around HR, you know, you might need to go to a professional HR firm to come and do a review.
The scope to which Bentley's have been engaged, is it, and I'm not entirely sure, is it firstly the asset management planning area, the internal control analysis in that regard, or is it the two other areas that have also been identified? Paul, I just
So
don't
they
recall.
built the plan. So they did the plan that came back to the committee, which we approved and endorsed. And I think we gave them the first one to said, you do the first one and bring it back. So
Yes, through the chair, there's, yes, they've spent considerable time last a couple of months relative to asset management audit, which will be presented to the next committee meeting. So there's no guarantee that they'll be doing subsequent audits. It will really depend on the nature of the audits being done. Also need to draw your attention to the fact with the draft budget this year and subsequent years, we have allowed, I think, $45,000 for engagement of independent audit firms, and loosely along the lines of 3 audits at about $15,000 each. But yes, it was Bentley's to do the first one, but there's no guarantee, no ongoing commitment for them to do future audits. They had offered their services, but there's no guarantee.
Karen?
Yeah, I think this is a really important discussion because understanding what other options there are to deliver the service that we need. And is it a full-time staff or is it an extra staff member to assist Nathan, who still needs to be upskilled in internal audit, and what that might look like? Okay. I think we need to tease that out more as to what the alternatives are, and understanding what you're saying and Natalie's saying in regard to what the market can offer us. And if that's $50,000 less or whatever the number is, then that's something that we need to seriously consider. And it's the same with the digital marketing officer. That's a $90,000 investment permanently. And the rationale and the reasoning still isn't that strong for me. I think it's needed, but I do get concerned that it might get gobbled up in just marketing and communications, and and how do we actually quarantine that role so it's not actually just doing everybody else's marketing and communication, which shouldn't be happening. So we do need a digital marketing strategy. We are developing a digital marketing strategy, and that's good. But yeah, what does that look like?
That, though?
That's an external consultant.
Okay, so then you ask that external consultant as part of that strategy, is that what, coming back to the levels of service, what, given the products and services that council, so that's why you have a digital marketing strategy. It's all around products and services. You're right, man, it's not around communications, because you've got another area to do all that internally. So digital marketing is about selling your product. Well, what products and services, and they might come and say, look, this could be done in these 3 quarters or whatever, and it could come to $30,000. Well, there's $60,000 you've saved straight away, rather than having someone permanent. So until that strategy is written, it's very hard. Now, if it's different, if this person was employed with the expertise to write that strategy for you, you'd say that's great, because that's what we did to Bentley's. They came and wrote that internal audit plan to saying, now, here's the type of work that we think that's going to, come out of it. Now, coming back to the internal audit, my understanding is that Nathan is the risk person, not the audit. And he's very much around work health and safety, but he was going to expand himself to cover all of risk management. Okay? He does the risk develops the risk profiles that incorporates controls. It's from those profiles that you develop your internal audit plan. It says we now need to test those controls. That you can actually get from an external provider. You don't need an internal. If you do, well, that person is not going to come in at $86,000. I can tell you that right now. Because Onka Paringa actually today put up an ad for 100 plus for that exact same position. Okay, so again, let's not get someone in who's then going to be run around and then ringing up Bentley's or somebody say, oh, you know, look, I need assistance because I can't do this.
So the administration has received a first cut of the internal control analysis in terms of the asset management planning. And there's no doubt that we wouldn't have got the same level of rigour and the same deep dive analysis if we did that ourselves. And that's as a consequence of the feedback from the committee, which is go to market, get the experts, fresh set of eyes, independent, do the, you know, no hold bar analysis, which is what we have effectively. We're going to go through a bit of an iterative process with the internal control professionals to work through and dot the I's and cross the T's over the next number of weeks leading up to the report. Now, all of the findings and the work that's now required to address the deficiencies and fill the gaps will fall back on, you know, the subject experts within the organisation, which is predominantly our engineers who control the assets, the open space, the roads and so forth. But they need support and assistance in terms of applying and monitoring those internal controls which are then implemented, because the engineers are completely flat chat and they don't have the capacity. So we need that resource internally to make sure that what we get back from the market in terms of the analysis is then implemented and is then resourced appropriately such that we get the benefits of it.
Okay, but will that, Henry, will that person, you're right, okay, let's take the asset management one. So all these recommendations have come back very much around engineering. So this internal audit person, would they have the engineering expertise to actually understand that what has been implemented is actually is what's been said?
No, but they work with the engineers. They work with the traffic engineers and the open space people to you know, work through what the auditors have identified. No, they're not the experts. Obviously, the bulk of the work has to be done from the engineering perspective. But to think that, and we thought that this was an economically efficient way of adding to a skill set that we had within the organisation that we could build. And if you're saying that, well, if you don't think you're going to get that for $80,000, you need to spend $120,000 because that's what Onka Paringa do. We don't have that capacity.
No, you don't. But what I'm saying, that if you look at just that asset review, my understanding would be is that they've picked up control deficiencies. Those control deficiencies is exactly what your asset people should have been having in place. So for them to implement it is actually part of their job. So it's not someone else coming in and overseeing them to do it. So again, if you look at the risk register, it will say all those risks and these deficiencies actually go to each one of those engineers. And if they're doing their job properly, they should be doing that. Doesn't need anyone else, because if they need someone else to manage their controls, well, then the whole organisation spirals out of control, because then everyone's going to be saying, well, I need someone else to manage my controls because I'm flat chat. Sorry, Peter.
It seems like Nathan is, you know, if he had more time, then he could be doing some of this work perhaps. I'm not sure. It sounds like we need an additional resource to sort of manage the consultancy projects. Now, if that's the case, I guess my concern is that we spend $86,000 on an internal resource to sort of manage the project, but we're only spending $45,000 on external projects as it is. And it seems to me that the balance is wrong there, if that's the case, because the effort in my mind should be more on the detailed projects that need to be done, as opposed to the sort of the administrative side of managing those projects, getting the briefs right, communicating between the parties and that sort of thing. Now, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the position correctly, but on the surface of it, that seems to be the perception I'm getting.
This is a really important conversation and council needs proper advice on this. I think it's good to have proper advice for everybody on how we manage these extra positions or whether we outsource or what that looks like. And I'd like some further information. I'm not sure what the other members think, but yeah, I'm not sure where we're going to from here, but I think this is really important that we nut this out and actually get some clear direction so that there is an understanding of what that might look like.
I mean, I
Rather
want to
than
make sure that, Henry, that whatever money that you've asked for as a C in your, is that's actually going to get the best value and the best bang for your buck. That's what I'm really coming from. And I'm saying I'm looking at other ways, and I'm looking at other councils that just haven't had a full-time internal audit, but have brought in someone and said, here's that, and you're right, it says there's that 45, but to have someone paying to oversee that, I mean, you might as well say to the firm, well, hang on, do us another 6 audits, and then we'll give you 30 to oversee it. And they can do that. That's part of the managing that overall plan. Usually you have the dual where it's a co-source where that internal audit person also does audits. That's what my understanding would happen, but are they going to do it?
Chair, so just using a real life example, don't minute this, is that organisation close to my heart is currently advertising for an internal audit manager because our team lost an internal audit manager, and we've taken the budget of the internal audit manager and we've given that to EY, and EY have produced way more work than one person could ever do. And you have to, Peter's right, you've got to watch out that if you don't want this person just to be a contract manager, like, you know, the consultancy firms can manage themselves, but that you can actually create a role and create a job of just managing them. But it's not, you know, you don't need that role. I don't know whether there's anyone with capacity in finance that can expand their role. They might be looking at a new, okay. So, but I would probably, I'm with Peter, I would probably not have that position and outsource it. Because if you push the firms hard enough, it's amazing what they can deliver. Yeah. And you just steadfast, you say, here's your bucket of money and this is what we want delivered. And we can do that as an audit committee. You know, we've trained
that's
in
right.
that to get the outcomes. But we, at this organisation I'm talking about, we're currently doing it and it's working.
Paul?
Thank you. Through the chair, I guess I need to note that Nathan reports through to me as, and further to the comments Henry's said, just to provide, I guess, some additional context clarity. We look to engage Nathan in this role mainly from the perspective he does have auditing qualifications that were transferable into this role. But it's also important to note his role is just not internal audit, it's risk as well and WHS. And with ongoing conversations I've had with Nathan, he's sort of continually referencing to me, certainly from the WHS perspective, there are statutory obligations on the council with its WHS roles and responsibilities, which he is predominantly responsible for. And my view would be, and certainly the experience, first-hand experience with the asset management work that Bentley's have been doing, he's been very good in sort of coordinating that and sort of managing, overseeing that process. And I would really sort of personally see this as if council wasn't to sort of commit to this role internally, I would see it as sort of a bit of a backward step in terms of what this committee was looking for us to invest in developing an internal audit function, which we previously haven't had. And I think the hybrid model that we've got at the moment, using Nathan's skill set, but also outsourcing as we need, because there was also the intent to not necessarily have to use external providers for every internal audit. It's horses for courses, and the expectation would be that for a number of the sort of lower hanging fruit, so to speak, Nathan would be able to do those internal audits in-house, but I just wanted to provide that additional context.
Adelaide?
Sorry, like one last point. Can Nathan outsource any of that WHS stuff if he sat across the internal audit and the risk function? Because you said he's picking up, he's got the skill set to do it. Can he outsource more of the risk stuff, so therefore he looks after risk and internal audit and does that kind of management role rather than getting a completely additional resource with the on-costs? Beef up his role. It could be more challenging for him. I'm not sure whether he's up for a challenge, but he could outsource some of that other stuff as well, because I mean the firms do risk.
Work health and safety. Yeah, that's what I said. Which means then you're actually outsourcing your work health and safety. So someone will come and do the audits. They'll do the reviews, and they'll advise council on how their work health and safety going. Now, again, mindful that you've actually got the local government services coming to do the real full-on review every 2 years, isn't it? That the work health and safety and the risk is done every 2 years. So there's another area that's feeding into council, hopefully, information that's going to Paul, look, I agree that we did say we wanted to build that internal capability, but you cannot do it at this level because you're bringing in someone at this level. Again, you cannot just have an internal audit officer, because that officer we're talking is at that level is just learning. So they're just going to be walking around going, so what am I going to do? You'd rather appoint an internal audit manager, someone like at Natalie's level, that will come in and build the frameworks and build and everything, and then say, okay, I'm going to now, I can't do this audit, I'm going to outsource, and I'll do those two. That's a different model. But you won't get it. All I'm saying is if you can pick up someone for 80,000 plus on costs, you're doing very well in this market.
One last point, because that's my role at SA Water, is that I outsource the stuff that I don't really want to do. If there's an interesting project, then I do that. It's actually really rewarding for me professionally, because you can choose what you do. If you need a subject matter expert, you can bring them in with the consultants. And you just juggle it, and it's actually a very rewarding and satisfying career. And you learn lots, because then I co-source with the internal auditors as well. So then I learn from them. You can really mix it up with that co-source model. Well, through the chair, as I said, we're a resource down. And we've just been out to market, so I know who's in the market, and there's not a lot in the market at the moment, especially for that range. I think you'd have trouble finding someone. But basically, we've proven that, or EY has proven that they can deliver more for the same cost. So the extra person that we don't have at the moment, their salary, and that hasn't even for a whole year. So their salary for the past 3 months has been provided to EY to complete the reviews on the internal audit plan. And it's the same cost we're coming within budget. So, because you've got your on costs and that leverage model, because the firms can have, 2 hours of partner time, 10 hours of a manager time, as opposed to a low level resource doing it all themselves. Does that make sense?
Through the chair, if I can again just provide some additional clarity relative to the dollars aligned to the bid. The dollars, yes, is seeking to align to internal audit and risk, because that's where the focus has been. But just to clarify, I think the $86,000, I think that's what we're referencing, including on costs, yes, that's essentially to continue a 12-month secondment position that we brought in, such that we could free up a sufficient amount of Nathan's capacity to undertake the internal audits and risk. So that's, just to be clear, that's not actually Nathan's salary. So acknowledge, yes, we wouldn't be getting anyone doing solely internal audits for those dollars. Importantly, what it was designed to do was so that we could continue to provide Nathan the capacity to continue doing the work he's doing. It was the dollars is essentially aligned to a continuing a role supporting him, such that support role would be assisting in this space, but predominantly with WHS. But without that support role, Nathan wouldn't have the capacity to do the internal audit work. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, so what's Nathan's preference? What does he want to do? Is it work health and safety? Is it internal audit? Is it risk management? Because we know he can't do all three. Okay, so what's he going to do? Risk and internal audit?
Yeah.
If it's that, then I think what Natalie's saying is free him up from work health and safety, and you could maybe get work health and safety done for even half that.
Through the chair, in terms of my experiences in work health, safety, risk, and increasingly internal control, within an organisation that is completely, at capacity, and I'll reflect on only the last couple of months with the internal control for the asset management plan. Again, we're dealing with an engineering team that is completely at capacity, and will continue to be at capacity. And we can't employ more engineers because we don't have the budget for it, and we need to maintain the cost, which we've been talking about. And Sam Delena, the manager, if he could, he would have another 3 engineers. We just can't afford it. And so it's about having those disciplines, and let's just talk about engineering, being supported by a specialist, increasingly specialist role, increasing those capabilities in Nathan, who has traditionally worked in work health, safety and risk management, and is ready to then broaden his experience for what is the best for the organisation. So it's not necessarily what Nathan wants to do, but what is best for the organisation. In the context of a limited budget, to not go out and employ a fully qualified manager of internal control, we just can't afford that. But what we can afford is the model that I thought we were talking about several months ago, which is we need internal control such that it is reflective of what's best in the market. And we get the Bentleys, and we've got Bentleys to do this first one. And we will be reaping the rewards of that. The implementation of that, I don't, with due respect, I don't agree that I can just give that to the engineers and they implement the outcomes from the audit. Yes, they're the predominant, focus of the delivery, but they need support. They need support in terms of being assisted where, in terms of administration or otherwise. If the model was that we have an internal control and I give it to the engineering department to then focus on delivery, it just won't happen. In that they are just so consumed by project delivery that unfortunately it will slip away. However, if we have this resource that's working with them that can assist relative to documentation, that can assist relative to process and so on and so forth, then I think the model that we're trying to create here is, again, what I thought we were talking about 6 or 9 months ago, which is to build that internal capacity. And we can't build that internal capacity without this resource to effectively, I think, allow Nathan to transition and provide that strategic work health, safety, risk management, and increasingly internal control, with this support officer taking up some of the slack relative to what is the work that he's been doing more recently.
Okay, so Henry, okay. So my understanding is when we discussed this about building the internal capacity was not about someone helping as soon as an audit's done. So, and again, maybe we should continue the discussion when we get this asset management audit. Because what I'm going to say is that there are controls in there that Sam and his team should pick up and say, we should be doing this. I don't need someone to tell me how to do it. This is a control weakness, which is part of engineering to manage this risk. I have to do it and my team have to do it. And if we don't do it, if you're saying that there's so engrossed in projects, well, if we don't do this, these projects are going to fall over. And if we're not getting that type of information from these audits, if it's just all about administrative processes, well, then that audit has failed the scope. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. We're not doing audits about administrative and someone helping someone to. These are meant to be key engineering controls that have broken down.
to that. So I think where we're at is that, again, the engineering department is at full capacity. If I put to Mr. Delena that he had to prepare a brief, go to market, shortlist, get the preferred provider, Bentley's, oversee the Bentley's consultants, facilitate all the information being provided, Bentley's then prepare a report, orchestrate conversations with the engineering department, Mr. Delena will be saying to me, he can't do it. He is focusing and has to deliver on the project. So,
No.
So what we have is the Bentley report, and it may well be a sort of where we're at is that when we get the Bentley's report, so all of that work that I've just explained is what Nathan's been doing, and he hasn't been able to do that without the support role. So it's because we got the work health safety responsibilities, we've got risk management more generally, and now the internal control. And so I think just by way of clarification, that when we do get that final Bentley's report, and obviously the engineers have been intimately involved with this process because, you know, the consultant's been here for days and weeks talking with the engineers. So that's, you know, that's all great. When we get the Bentley's report and it's finalised, then I expect that, yes, it will be given to Sam and his engineers, and it'll be, Sam, make sure you do all that because that needs to be based, you know, predicated on your, you know, basic work functions. So then Nathan needs to go on to the next area of internal control, which let's say we go to the market, and I think it's business continuity. You know, we'll go to now. So who in the organisation is overarchingly responsible for business continuity? Well, it'll be, I don't know, but Nathan's resource. So we need somebody to prepare a brief, we need to go to market, we need to engage somebody, we need to oversee, we need to provide all that information. We don't have the capacity other than Nathan's role. By the way, he's got responsibilities for work health, safety and risk management.
Correct. And Henry, and this is where, and again, so this is the again, what the point that I raised. So when Bentley's did the internal audit plan, right, at that point of time, and this is where, Natalie, tell me if I'm wrong, and I know other councils are doing it, they give that whole 3-year plan to one firm who can deliver on those, every single one of those audits. And then there's no more Nathan having to go. That firm will come back with the project scope brief to come through this committee, and we sign off on it and say, yes, that's how we want that internal audit done. They go and do it, and they come back and they hand the report to you as the chief executive. The way it's being done now, yes, Nathan will be taking up his time every time he needs to go to market, but why are we doing that? Why can't we select a core firm who's got the skills and capabilities to deliver strategic, operational, compliant, all these audits? I'm seeing other councils using one firm and they give them a contract for 2 or 3 years and they sharpen their pencil because they're getting it for 3 years and cuts down the costs again.
And back to that point that you engage one firm to do these multiple internal controls?
No, the audits, that's on the plan. So we've got 9 or 10 audits over 3 years in that rolling plan.
Yeah, but I thought the advice was that you need to have that fit for purpose. You know, you don't get an engineering specialist to do an internal control review in terms of business continuity or HR or
Correct. But the bigger firms, Henry, have got the access to go and get these expertise, okay? And what I'm saying is the small mid-tier firms who are just accounting firms don't have it. The bigger ones do. We're talking global firms. So they need a particular, and if you're building a dam in here, I'm sure one of these big four will go to countries that are building dams and they'll bring out their experts to say, let's get you involved in this audit. So that's what I'm trying to say is that right now, I do feel for Nathan. If he has to go back every time to fill those next 10 audits, well then yes, he is going to be snowed under.
I was just going to reaffirm that say for an SA Water, you know, we've done a wellbeing review with a director out of Perth. We've done the asset management review with a director out of Brisbane. Like with COVID now and everything being done via Zoom, it's even better because you get the best of these firms. The best person in Australia is delivering it, and it's not that much more expensive because they've had to sharpen their pencil.
Yeah, there's no travel costs and.
The other thing I was thinking of, the other alternative, and Peter, you can probably back me up with this, is that there are a lot of niche consultants in Adelaide. So people that used to be partners in accounting firms that you can, if you've got just that, that specific request for the engineering controls to be implemented, you can get them in, they've got a daily rate. These guys are good at what they do, and you just sign them up for that that little piece of work. And that's actually quite efficient because you're using someone that's got extensive experience in engineering and local government. You know what I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
Peter?
You
So,
can-
to come in and just help with that piece of work, as opposed to just having an admin person come in.
So Henry, so what I'm saying is that you're right. I mean, you can have this internal audit resource, but I just don't want someone just to help out Nathan, or rather Nathan just worry about what his role is and get, really do that role. And this role, if you want to have it, what I'm talking about is that an internal audit and risk management officer. So that's just really like a support role for Nathan. And I'm saying you get better value. And I know you're saying you can't afford it at the moment because you haven't got that budget, but then you'd be better off going to the market and filling it, and you'll get greater scope and more work out of that than having this internal role support Nathan.
Fantastic. So what we do is that we at the next audit committee, we do present what we would have got to that point in terms of the internal audit control, in which that report will have one or two of the other managers responsible for those asset categories, and we'll talk about the results on the internal control, and then we'll present further information to clarify this model in terms of oversight and facilitation relative to what we've been thinking, which is a hybrid model. But what I think I'm hearing here, well, it's effectively a completely outsourced model. So we can work through that at the next audit committee.
Well, only because I'm saying is that if you've only got this amount to spend, you will not get the resource that's going to, well, you'll get someone, but all that person is doing is just assisting Nathan. All I'm saying is, do you want someone where you're going to get really, really professional, and I'll use the word professional into, because it is a profession in its own right. It's got its own certifications, its own professional development, and these firms have to keep up with this. Because that's how they tender. They say, we are members of this association, we've got certified and really, and that's, you will, when you see an end result report, you will actually say, you know what, for what we pay, we've got some really good value. That's what I'm.
Again, we've referenced Nathan a number of times in the organ. I'm not trying to orchestrate a solution for Nathan. I want a solution that's best for the organisation. And based on the experience around the table here, if that is, well, okay, Henry, that's where you might have been thinking, but let's just regroup and think about that. And if the message is don't go down that path, go another way, well, that's fine. That's great, because what I need is the best solution for the business. And I've just been talking about, previously, outsourcing and reviewing, our services relative to our rec services and our depot operations. So
this is another service.
That's a continuation of that. That's right.
It is exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, anything further on the budget then? So again, we're looking at here. So we're going to take the two recommendations to 2.5, or 2 and 2.5 up front. And then we have to look at obviously areas where we can make some savings around.
Through the chair, look, I'm just mindful of the fact that the motion passed with the long-term financial plan. I guess of the view you'd most probably be looking to apply consistency with the 2 and 2.5%. Increase. We, through the chair, we have articulated in the reports, and I just want to be clear that we were never really looking at the increase in general rates being the total panacea. That's part of it. We've referenced the fact that, yes, general rates is 70% of our income, so it's a key part of the consideration, but rightly so that the council has to look at the whole budget, and so it's not just rates. I just want to be clear that we're not advocating that the budget, the panacea is by general rate revenue, and particularly that was why I referenced the definition of financial sustainability, because that definition is predicated on not having spikes, unplanned, unforeseen spikes with general rate increases. And if the committees and in turn councils of the view that a 3% rate increase isn't palatable, and from the administration perspective, we're on the same view that whilst the long-term financial plan up until now has been predicated on that, given current circumstances, we would never realistically going to be proposing that. And yes, ultimately, end of the day, it is a decision for the council and partly a political one as well. So acknowledge that part to it as well.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Peter?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the discussion earlier about the 2%, 2.5%. However, I sometimes think we get too wound up in the percentage, and I tend to think that we actually need to be aiming at the target in terms of what getting to our overall operating balanced position at some point in terms of how we get there. And part of it is the rate increase, of course. But I mean, if you have I don't know what the average rate is here, but if say it was $1,500, I'm not sure what it is exactly, but on that basis, the difference between 2.5 and 3% is, $7.50 the entire year. It's a small amount of money in dollar terms, but it looks big when you talk about it in percentage terms. And so I know there's no way of getting around the percentage, in terms of the publicity, but it's worth bearing in mind when we're trying to make decisions about what we're trying to do and how we're trying to achieve that, because it's not a big deal in the end result, I don't think. That's my main comment.
Thanks, Peter. And sorry. No.
Just quickly, our rates in Gawler are really relatively high because we are a growth council, and constantly on a daily basis I get asked why our rates are so high compared to other councils. It would be great if the average rate was $1,500. I think it's a bit,
what is the average rate, roughly?
Sorry.
Through the chair, the average rate is certainly not $1,500, as Councillor Hughes rightly alludes to. I think, excluding the waste management charge, it's about $1,700 plus the waste fee. And well, I can recall, Peter, for the 2021 budget when we adopted the 2.4, the communication was for the average ratepayer that was about a $40 increase. So yes, I do acknowledge our rates, I guess, are at the higher end of the scale, but nonetheless we have demonstrated previously that when you take a lot of factors into consideration, including property valuations from council to council, our rates are certainly not extreme, as some people like to keep telling me, because we've done that intel comparison with other councils, and yes, the property valuations do come into the calculation of the rate in the dollar, and I know in terms of our rate in the dollar applied, yes, that's high, but that is heavily informed by the actual property valuations. And as Peter, you'd know, compared to Adelaide Metro Councils, e.g. your Prospects and your Burnsides, where the average valuation isn't 300,000, it might be double that. The rate in the dollar is a lot lower, and also you've got to take into consideration with the rate in the dollar calculation, those councils that have a fixed charge by default immediately have a far lower rate in the dollar. So there's I'm not trying to advocate smoke and mirrors, but you've got to be looking at the rating structure for each council in detail to get a proper comparison.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so any further discussion on this paper? Because we've got a recommendation that the draft budget report be received and noted and incorporate a 2 to 2.5% increase in general rate revenue from existing ratepayers. Someone to move that way? Thanks, Natalie. Seconded. David, thank you. All in favour? Okay, thanks. So Paul, what's the next movement of, so what's the next process? So this will go back to council? And then is there any further, so is there external consultation? What happens?
Yes, through the chair. The next steps from here, so as I touched on earlier, we've had the 4 workshops with elected members. This was the first formal discussion with the budget and long-term plan. So the next steps are, we have a special council meeting scheduled for the 15th of April, which importantly will be informed by the discussion tonight. And then at the normal council meeting on the 27th of April, we'll be seeking council's endorsement of the budget solely for public consultation, to then go out for consultation for a 3 to 4 week period, get the submissions from the public, and during that submission period, I think the 18th of May is the next meeting of this committee. So we'll then bring, during that consultation period, we'll bring back to you an update of the long-term plan budget for the committee's final review, such that the feedback from the committee can essentially be considered as a submission to assist council in its deliberations. And then after the audit committee meeting, there's a special council meeting to hear the submissions, either in writing or verbal. And then council needs to turn its mind to, well, as a result of those submissions, do adjustments need to be made to the budget? And then the final step is the special council meeting, I think in the first week of July, earmarked for the actual adoption of the budget rates, fees and charges. So this committee will have a further look
Okay, good.
of
That's
the
what I
data.
know.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, last item I think is our audit committee work plan, and you've done an update on that work plan, Paul. Anything or any comments from committee members? I think you're just tracking as we are covering areas as part of our meeting agenda. And any comments from the committee members? Move it. Okay, thanks, David. Seconded by Peter. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you. So that's all of our office reports. We've got no items listed for discussion, no items listed for discussion in future meetings, or we will. We've got obviously the budget coming back, and we'll talk about the internal audit reports coming to this committee. There's no questions without notice, motions without notice, nil. And before I close, I just thank everyone again for their time and contribution tonight, and wish everyone a happy Easter. Enjoy and have a relaxing, long weekend. Refresh, come back, recharge the battery. So thank you all. Officially close the meeting.